Hi, this is Robert Weinstein. It is May 13th, 2014. We're at the Brooklyn Public Library Central Branch. It is just before 4 o'clock, and we're talking again with Don MacIver. This is the fourth interview. We've gone through his service and what else have we gone through?
His training at
his training and service in Vietnam, and now we're going to go through his activism after service. So, Don, where would you like to start?
Well, let me start in 1992. As I've said in some of my interviews before, I've been working for the Republican Party and had been a consultant in Texas and nationally. And in 1986, I left the Republican Party because I realized that the Republican Party didn't fit my philosophy anymore. And the first president I voted for was now living out in Los Angeles. And I voted for Michael Dukakis and Lloyd Bentsen. Well, number one, I wasn't excited about Michael Dukakis, and number two, I didn't like Lloyd Bentsen, having known him as a U.S. Senator from Texas. But I voted for him anyway. I sort of closed my eyes and pulled the lever. But anyway, the following election, 1992, I'd had a lot of time to think about stuff. I'd been working, I was working steadily, and a lot of that time I was too busy to actually be an activist. But I would go to AIDS Project LA. They would always have these big things they'd have their white party at the summer party at the LA Zoo and things like that. At Warner Studios or whatever, really, really nice affairs. And they'd have silent auctions, and so I bid on things. I had money, but I didn't have time. So in 1992, Bill Clinton comes to LA and he makes this huge speech about what he was going to do for the gays and ending the ban on gays in the military. And that really excited me. Bill Clinton excited a lot of people. And so I voted for him, and then in early 1993, a New York congressman when Clinton met with these incoming freshman class of Democrat congressmen, Congressman Jerry Nadler from New York, stood up at that meeting and told the president-elect to issue 2 executive orders. One, to lift the ban on research on stem cell research, and also number 2, to issue an executive order lifting the ban on gays in the military. Just like Harry Truman did in 1948 when he issued an executive order lifting the ban on the segregation of the armed forces and integrated the armed forces. It happened and it stood. What Clinton did was he issued an executive order on stem cell research, but he said, well, I'm also going to issue an executive order on lifting the ban on gays in the military, rather than doing it. So that's when all this stuff came up, and Sam Nunn from the United States Senate was going on board submarines and going in the tight quarters where the guys slept in stacked bunks and all of this kind of stuff. And don't you just hate the idea of sleeping below a gay man and all of the horrible things that they said. What about taking showers together? Being looked at by a gay man? What happens if someone drops the soap? I mean, all of this trash. It was absolutely ridiculous. What I told people, and eventually when I went to the March on Washington and I was interviewed by TV stations around the world, in the United States, and NPR radio and all of this stuff, and a woman asked me that question, I said, listen, men and boys have been showering since 7th grade gym class, PE class, and they've been in the Cub Scouts and the Boy Scouts, and they got skinny dipping together and camping out together and everything else. I said, this is absolutely absurd. So anyway, I started looking around So in early '93, after he was inaugurated, and this started coming out, I started looking around for gay veterans organizations. They had one in Long Beach, and they were forming one in LA, in West Hollywood. So first, I heard about the 1993 March on Washington, which was being held in April of '93. They had one in 1987. I didn't have any money, but I got on an airplane and I flew to Washington. And the only clothes I brought Levi's and things like that, but I also brought my jungle fatigues from Vietnam, my jungle boots, my canvas and leather jungle boots, and my green beret. And I had all of my miniature medals on my uniform. I flew into National Airport, and I immediately went to Union Station. And at Union Station, they had big lockers there. They don't have it there anymore after 9/11, but they had lockers, and I threw my duffel bag into the locker and proceeded to walk. It's very, very close to the Capitol, so I just walked over to the different events that were going on. In the meanwhile, I would go into the restrooms at the Union Station, and I would wash my face and brush my teeth and make myself look decent, sponge bathe or whatever. I felt like a homeless person, and actually, while I was in Washington at that time, I spent one night in DuPont Circle, literally freezing to death. It was a very cold night, and I was in my dressed very flimsily, and I sat on park benches and shivered that night. But anyway, the next day they had it was maybe the first day I was there. They had a ring around the Capitol on HIV/AIDS, and so people were hand to hand, and they formed a ring all the way around the White House. And then they had a rally down at the pool, the long stretch pool that's between the Capitol and the Lincoln Memorial. So I went to that, and that's the night I slept on the park benches. In the meanwhile, I met two veterans from New York, Dennis Lund and Boyd Maston. And I exchanged phone numbers with them and everything else. They realized I didn't have a place to stay, but they didn't have any room where they were staying. People were sleeping on floors and on couches and everything else. They felt real bad leaving me there. So anyway, I slept on a bench that night. I was a homeless veteran, and then the next day was the march. So I went back over to the Union Station, cleaned up, and then went over to the march, and they were marching all of the veterans up front because that was the big issue, was don't ask, don't tell. I met some really, really fine people there, including two gentlemen from Los Angeles who, one of them had two sons, and both of them had parachuted into Panama when they were deposing Noriega, and one of them got shot in the butt. It was at Walter Reed Hospital when George and Barbara Bush came and visited. The president asked me, so where'd you get? He said, I got shot in the butt. Mm-hmm. But anyway, he introduced his two fathers, literally, and it was really, they were Army Rangers, and here they'd been raised by two men. I met other people there, and then we sat and listened to all of the people giving the speeches. There was hours of entertainment and speeches. And the second night, just as we were walking away from that, there was a guy in tank top and bicycle shorts and tennis shoes. And we were walking from different places, but we sort of walked together as we got up, as we were heading toward an exit. And we started talking, and I told him that I didn't have a place to stay, and he said, well, I live out in Maryland, but you're welcome to come and stay at my place. I said, well, there's a big protest over at the Pentagon tomorrow. He said, well, we'll come back in for that. He said, my dad works at the Pentagon. He's an officer at the Pentagon. So we went over to Union Station. I got my duffel bag out of the locker, and we got on a train, and we headed north. And then where we got off, he had a car parked, and then it was a little bit farther for that. So anyway, I stayed there that night. We got up early the next morning and went into Washington, and we went to the Pentagon. And there were about 2,200 people there. I was on a grassy lawn just away from the Pentagon, and people were giving emotional speeches and about the stupidity of the "Don't Ask, Don't Tell," which wasn't named yet. It was ban the bomb. I mean, bomb the ban. Oh, yeah, bomb the ban. You know, so that's what the signs with Uncle Sam and all of that said. And well, yeah, like here's an Uncle Sam sign that says, "I want you to end the military ban." I don't see the other one here in the pictures, but anyway, so we went to that, and then I ended up flying back to, while we were there, after the march, we marched over to the Vietnam Wall. And Miriam Ben Shalom, who was the first woman, she was a staff sergeant, she was the first woman, a gay person, by a federal judge, reinstated into the armed forces after having been kicked out for being gay. Oh. Okay. It was a federal judge named Nickerson, I think, out on Long Island who did it. He died a few years ago. There was big articles on that he took a real chance on that. But then she eventually, when her reenlistment came up, they refused to reenlist her. They made up excuses for that. Mm-hmm. So Miriam Ben Shalom was a very tough woman. She's a school teacher in Milwaukee, taught 4th grade. She had been threatened. She had her brake lines cut. She had on her car. She had all kinds of death threats and everything else after she was reinstated. And so she was a real go-getter. She had also been in the Israeli army, Israeli Defense Forces. So she leads, we were doing some interviews, taped interviews on the lawn, and people talking about their military service and being gay in the military. Someone got kicked out. I didn't get kicked out, I was just closeted. So I didn't get kicked out of the military for being gay. I kept that very quiet, and while all the guys were going out to the bars and the bar girls and all that kind of stuff, I stayed back and treated them for VD when they came back. Treated them for gonorrhea and other things. So I was lucky I just stayed away from all of that. But so we marched over to the Vietnam Wall. And they sent over park police on horses because you weren't supposed to do that. There were demonstrations at the wall were not allowed. And Miriam's like, this is our wall too, you know. So anyway, finally they got from, I guess, higher headquarters, they were just told, just leave them alone. So we all marched by the wall. I have a video of that also, that whole episode, and the camera going all over the place and everything. Very historical footage. So that's going into the archives. So I flew back to LA, and then I hooked up with a group down in.
Wait, so you were in Washington D.C. for 2 days or 3 days?
Probably 3 days.
Okay.
Yeah, by the time I flew back.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And
how many people were there? Just out of...
well, it was supposed to be a million gay march, and it was so scattered because so many people were watching it and not marching, and then it took all day for the march to last, and half of the program was already over by the people who were finally arriving. Some of them were arriving until 5, 6 o'clock. Some of the marching units. And I'm like, man, this is a long
Wow.
march.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So I don't think they ever got a real count. And it probably was at least 500,000, and maybe heading toward 1 million.
Mm-hmm.
So it was big.
And was it on the mall? Was it located close to...
It went up. I'm not sure. Constitution Avenue. I think maybe was the parade route.
Okay.
And then marched right over into the mall, and they had all the stage set up and the big screens and all of that kind of stuff. I'm trying to remember. Oh, and they also had the AIDS panels laid out. They had not the whole thing. In '96, they laid out all 40,000 panels, and then people brought new panels that they added to the quilt at that time.
Wow.
So that was very emotional, and especially when you see the AIDS quilt, and then you walk over and you see the names of your friends on the AIDS quilt,
Mm-hmm.
and then you walk over to the Vietnam Wall, and you look up your 20 friends who died in Vietnam, and you're like, why did this happen? You know, in one generation of losing friends in a war, young, and then young people dying in Vietnam.
Right.
You know, or of AIDS. So I went back to Los Angeles, and I was stop just for a second. Okay, so I went back to.
There we go.
I went back to Los Angeles. I was living down in Venice Beach, and I joined they had in Long Beach. They had a gay, lesbian, bisexual veterans chapter, and so I went to that, and we marched in the gay pride parade in Long Beach on May 23rd, 1993. So this was a month after having been. Yeah, almost exactly a month after having been in Washington on April 23rd through the 26th or something like that. So I was part of the color guard. All of the color guard were dressed in uniform. It wasn't like they were in Levi's and a jungle fatigue jacket or something like that. We made sure that it was a proper color guard, carrying all the right flags and in order, marching them in counting cadence and all of that kind of stuff. So I did that, and then the next month I marched in the LA Gay Pride in the color guard on June 27, 1993, Gay Pride Week, and we marched through West Hollywood up Santa Monica Boulevard. So I was getting very involved. It's interesting at the march in West Hollywood. I met a Marine in his dress blues who had been kicked out of the military. I met another Marine, Latino, who had been kicked out. He was in his khakis. He was a sergeant. And then a woman in her uniform from Annapolis, the Naval Academy, who had gotten kicked out for being gay. Beautiful girl. Mm-hmm. But anyway, we marched and we got a lot of applause. So, and then that was that parade. So the next thing that happened is in July. I'm sitting back in LA, sitting at my beach house in Venice Beach, and enjoying getting a tan, my year-round tan, and all of that stuff. And I get a phone call from Miriam Ben Shalom. And she said, Don, can you come to Washington and get arrested at the White House? I said, what for? She said, well, the don't ask, don't tell thing, because now it was being proposed. Now it was going into legislation.
Okay.
It was still bomb the ban, but they were coming up with this phraseology of don't ask, don't tell. So I said, well, Miriam, I said, don't you have people in the Washington, D.C. area who can go over to the White House and get arrested? And she said, but Don, you look so good in uniform. Well, that settled that. I couldn't turn her down. I'm not sure I would have turned her down anyway, but that was a nice comment, and I'm like, okay, well, I do look good in uniform. We all look good in uniform. Everyone looks good in uniform. So, having just spent money on going to Washington in April, I was really not able to pay for the trip. So I went to all those people from the gay veterans and the two men that I, with their two sons who I met from Santa Monica. And everyone contributed money for my trip.
So you could go get arrested.
So I could go get arrested. So I flew to Washington. Oh, and I also called these two veterans from New York, Boyd Maston and Dennis Lund. Well, Dennis took it upon himself to rent a car in New York, drive down to Washington, D.C., to pick me up at the airport, and then found housing at the home of a gay priest. So we're all set. So we went over to the. That's the gay priest there, and that's Dennis Lund.
Okay.
So we went over to his house and spent the night there. And then the next day we met at the headquarters of the National Organization of Women.
Okay.
And so some of those people, some of their president and some other people were getting arrested. David Mixner, who was a top political consultant of Bill Clinton, who had first urged him to lift the ban. And then Miriam Ben Shalom was there. Then Darby from Chicago and his lover, Mr. Bova. I'm trying to remember first names now. But anyway, we all went over there. There were either 24 or 28 of us. And what they did at NOW was they trained us in nonviolent, what do they call it? Nonviolent protest.
But were you not actually...
Right. Everything was choreographed with the White House. They knew we were coming. Mm-hmm. The park police who protect the perimeter of the White House. That's also changed since 9/11. Right. Now they have not only the park police more highly trained, but they also have Secret Service out there. Oh, okay. And they've also blocked off that area of the Pennsylvania Avenue between the White House and Lafayette Park. Okay. So we trained on resisting, but without any violence, anything like that. And so we marched through Lafayette Park, walked from their headquarters through Lafayette Park, and then walked across Pennsylvania Avenue and stood in 2 or 3 columns in front of the White House, and we're waiting to be arrested. So.
And what were you arrested? What was the charge against you? What was it? What was it about what you were doing that made it an arrestable offense?
We were blocking the sidewalk in front of the White House.
Okay.
It was that simple. So I stood there, and then the press, they had it roped off. Our supporters were all standing across the street in Lafayette Park. They had buses lining the street because when they arrested us, they were going to put us on buses, handcuff us, and then put us on buses and take us to Anacostia Station, police precinct, to book us and give us our tickets. So I was standing there, and then the press started yelling from the sidelines about who people were. Someone with a microphone was asking who everyone was and why they were there, and I told them that I was there supporting gay veterans who couldn't be there, because they were in the service and all of that. And the fact that I got so pissed off that here they were telling people that they weren't good enough to be in the service. And here I am, a Green Beret, one of the very elite in the service, a decorated war veteran of the Vietnam War, promoted. Every sergeant and officer just thought I was the best guy they'd ever had in the military. I mean, I was really, really committed to everything I did. And the idea that there are Army Rangers, there are Army Green Berets, there are Navy SEALs, there are no telling what else in the military who are gay. And they have to hide it. Now, one thing is like in Special Forces, you have a 12-man team. You have 2 officers and you have 10 enlisted men. And you rely on each other. You have to cover each other's back. You have to be absolutely truthful to these people. And what is the first thing they tell you to do? Is lie. Right. Don't tell people about your sexuality. And that really upset me. When I was in Vietnam, there were times when I used to go to the bars and the guys would go upstairs with the barmaids and stuff like that, and I'd go back to the hotel or the safe house where we stayed. My excuse was, well, I've got a girlfriend back home.
Right.
It was always the girlfriend back home. And it really upset me that I had to lie to these people because they were my very best friend. I didn't tell him I was gay until 1982. And he said, well, I always thought you might be. And I said, well, why is that? And he said, well, it was nothing you ever did. It was just I had a sense. And probably because I wasn't going out boring. The guys had an opportunity to. And that was very disappointing. Here 12 years after I leave Vietnam, the guy that I really, 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 really liked, and we were best friends, and I visited him and his wife out in California, and his wife was just crazy. She's like, well, Trent is going nuts waiting for you to get here. So there was a real platonic love there, when you're in combat with people, and then it's like that. But anyway, so I'm standing there, and then they were singing the protest songs, "We Shall Overcome." I never learned the protest songs because I'd never been in a protest before.
Okay.
Yeah, this was except for doing the ring around the Congress. That I had never been. I was a young Republican protesting the liberals in Congress,
Right.
So three of us finally sat down, and it was Miriam Ben-Shalom and Darby. I keep saying Pat Darby, but his lover is Pat Bova. But anyway, the three of us sat down. Miriam and I were in uniform. We were the only two there in uniform. And they started arresting people. And they would walk them over to the curb, and then they would handcuff them. They'd take any sharp objects, take your shoelaces, take your necktie, all of that stuff, so you're not hanging yourself and all that. And
how were they treating you? Were they treating you?
Oh, with total respect.
Okay.
Yeah. I looked across to some of these guys, and they were in dark blue pants, very dark blue pants, and then a light blue shirt with some dark blue trim on it or whatever.
Right.
But over their right pocket, on their right breast, if they had been in the military, they could put their distinguished unit insignia.
Okay.
There were like 5 of them who had the scroll of the Green Berets. It's a scroll, and it has...
Is it on your uniform? Yeah, okay.
It's on my beret too. But anyway, it's a scroll, and there's a dagger up, and then it has 2 cross arrows going back to like Roger's Rangers, and then the dagger for stealth, and then the scroll on the bottom that says "De oppresso liber," to free the oppressed.
Okay.
Now, here I got in my mind, number one, I was freeing the oppressed in Vietnam, and here I am freeing the oppressed in my own country,
Right.
who I fought for in Vietnam.
Right.
So, and that's going to be on my tombstone.
Oh,
I've
yeah?
already told my best friend, my brother, I said, listen, I'll be buried in the Dallas-Fort Worth, my ashes will be. I said, put my name on there, U.S. Army, Vietnam War, which is standard, the dates of my birth and death, and then De oppresso liber, to free the oppressed. Because that's the story of my life. As I've said, the first 20 years, the first half of my life was defined by the Vietnam War, and the second half is AIDS and the working with my activism for gays and people with HIV. So I'm sitting there in these. There were a couple of these park police standing on the curb, and I noticed that they were pointing at me. And the thing is, when you look at the uniform, and you look at the ribbons, and you look at the badges, and you look at the unit citations, you can read someone's history. You can read their military history, where they were, what they got, and what they did. So I've got a combat medic badge, I've got a Bronze Star, I've got an Air Medal, I've got an Army Commendation Medal, I've got a Good Time Conduct Medal, and then some Vietnamese decorations, and then service medals, and then the Presidential Unit Citation, the Meritorious Unit Citation, the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry Unit Citation, and the Civic Action Unit Citation, and Vietnamese Jump Wings. American Jump Wings Combat Medic Badge, which means I treated people under fire.
Oh, okay.
So those guys are standing there, and they're pretty impressed. I mean, you know, here are Green Berets looking at another Green Beret.
Right.
3 of us were sitting on the ground. I was the last one they picked up. I was sitting on the ground, and I'm alone. And I turned and I looked at the White House, and I was like, what the hell am I doing here? I didn't want to be there. I thought it was a very embarrassing situation.
Right.
I was exposing myself. I was coming out myself nationally. I was coming out as a gay Green Beret, and I'm sure that there were Green Berets around the country who wouldn't appreciate that. Although there were probably more Green Berets that were probably gay that never were in the same situation I was.
Right.
So I looked at the White House, and I was very humbled to be there also. I'm like, you know something, I'm sitting on the sidewalk in front of the White House protesting Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but also felt very powerful. Because by then I'm sitting by myself, and all these news reporters are Washington Post, all the networks, and everyone, they're yelling questions at me. Where were you? What did you do? You know, all of this stuff. And then they picked me up. I was hesitant as to whether or not Mary Mitchell was carried away, and Darby was carried away. He was in a T-shirt, and then they picked me up. I was hesitant about doing that. I thought about walking, but I thought, you know something, this is serious, and I'm just gonna.
Was there danger of you losing an honorable discharge, or like?
Oh no, I'd already had 2 honorable discharges.
Okay. So there was like, if anyone found out there wasn't a danger of you losing any status.
I had an honorable discharge in 1973, and then I re-upped in the reserves, and I have another one, honorable discharge from 1976. So
Okay.
I'm doobly there.
Okay.
Double.
Okay.
So I was protected. No, there was nothing they could do to me,
Okay.
except maybe protesting in front of the White House in uniform.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So they picked me up and took me over the curb, and the police officers immediately started they took the badge off of my beret. That's the one with the crossed arrowheads and the arrows in the
Okay.
and all that. They took off all my medals, anything that had a pin back. They took off my bootlaces. I was wearing spit shine jump boots with my pants tucked in, trousers tucked into the boots. And across the street, everyone was yelling, "Let him keep his medals. He earned those medals." You know, they were vocal. And then they put us on a bus. We sat there for a long time, and I had those plastic handcuffs, and it was behind my back, and I had a bad shoulder. And I'll tell you what, my shoulder was just killing me. But anyway, they drove us over to the Anacostia station, and I think they put us in a jail cell for about 2 minutes, and then pulled each one of us out one at a time. We sat there, and they wrote us a $50 ticket. It looked like a traffic citation for blocking the White House sidewalk. I still have that ticket, the original, because I made a Xerox copy of it, and I sent that in with my $50 fine. And it's the only time in my life I've ever been arrested. No DWIs, nothing. You know, I've said I've never been indicted. I've never spent a day in jail, a night in jail, and so I feel at 67 years old I'm pretty lucky. So I did some crazy things when I was young, as everyone does. So anyway, while we were there, all of the police officers were just super nice. They were on our side. It was really funny because, you know, a lot of these police forces had already been acceptive of gays. I think by the early 90s, I think Washington D.C. and New York City had gay police. So then they released us, and then I put on all my medals again, and we went over to a club in DuPont Circle, which is the big gay neighborhood. Okay. And it was interesting because there were some young Marines there who were probably at the Marine Barracks, assigned to the Marine Barracks, Navy Yard and all of that. And I had a lot of people come up to me and thank me for what I did, which was really nice. And David Mixner was there. And so we had a celebration. And then I felt really good about it. I felt really good about what I'd done. And then the amazing thing is, the next thing I know is my picture is flashed across the AP wires. And it shows up in Philadelphia, it shows up in Dallas, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C., and maybe even in New York. And my uncle lived in Dallas. He was my dad's older brother, and then my aunt, my dad's sister out of San Francisco, my uncle had seen my picture in the paper, and he said, "Did you know that Donnie was gay?" That was my growing up name, Donnie. He said, "Did you know that Donnie was gay and he was in Washington getting arrested at the White House?" And she said, "No." He said, "Well, should we call Don and talk to him about it?" And they were talking about calling my father. I don't think that my father ever knew. I don't think about my father ever knew. I finally told my mother last year that I got arrested at the White House. I don't think they ever realized it.
Did they call you when they found the picture?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I think my Aunt Ruth. I don't know if it was then or when I saw her at a later date. She told me that Ernie had called her and asked about that. Oh, here. So there it is. There's me being carried away.
Oh, right. Okay. Mm.
And so that was that. And then I went back and I became a real activist. I moved shortly to Dallas, where my company wanted me to set up a new sales territory, and then they sort of pulled the rug out from under me. And then I got on an airplane and flew to New York in '94 for the Don't Ask, or the 25th anniversary of the Stonewall riots, and their parade, their march, their annual Gay Pride March, and also they were having the Gay Games, which was an international affair that we used to call the Gay Olympics, and then the U.S. Olympic Committee banned the word Olympic from anyone. They wanted to get rid of the gays using it. So what couldn't you use anymore? Olympic pizza. Anything with Olympic in it, they trademarked that name. You couldn't use the word Olympic. Stupidity again. Just like what's going on with this whole thing with gay marriage now.
Right.
So I flew up here, and I marched in the color guard. And we marched by the White House. No, we didn't walk. This was in New York. We marched by the United Nations. We took some really nice photographs there. And then I was thinking about going back to Dallas, but that whole sales thing wasn't going to work there. And so my friends, Roy Maston and Dennis Lund, said, stay in New York, we'll get you a job. And so the first job I got was working for a gentleman who had a private collection of military. He had 10,000 items of military dating back to the Civil War.
Wow.
And so I cataloged his entire collection. 10,000 items I wrote in a 535-page catalog.
Oh my God. How long did that take you?
3 years.
Okay.
But he was collecting along the way, and I set up all the displays and all that. They originally wanted to put it on board the USS Intrepid in the Hudson River. Mm-hmm. But that sort of was quashed when they wanted him to spend $1.5 million to build the space on the Intrepid to put it. So anyway, then he auctioned that off, and then I had a couple of other jobs. But along the way, in 1987, when I was living out in Venice Beach, I got hepatitis, and I'd already had hepatitis, but I went to the West LA VA. And the doctor asked me if I'd test for HIV. Well, I had it. This was in '87. I had no idea when I got it. The first cases in New York were 1980, 1981.
Right, yeah.
And so I was living in Houston in 1982, and then I moved up to Austin. I had a boyfriend. But anyway, people say, well, who gave it to you? It's like, don't even go there. That makes absolutely no sense.
Right.
To try to pinpoint who, what, when, and where, and how much, and why, it doesn't make sense. So that's when I started. That's when I started going to Project LA to their big fundraising events and contributing to them and all of that. And so when I got to New York, I got sick. I'd been taking the one medication, but only sporadically, AZT.
Oh wow!
And you know, it was only partially effective.
Right.
And a lot of people said the medicine was worse than a disease, which any medicine is not worse than a disease, I guess. But anyway, so I got sick. I lost 50 pounds in 6 weeks, and got pneumonia. And I go into the VA hospital, and then they sent me over to NYU Medical Center, where they were doing the first testing of the triple combination, 3 drugs.
Oh, the cocktail.
So I got that, and I started getting better. My T cells had dropped down to 80 to 71. Normal is between 500 and 1400.
Oh,
So
okay.
anyway, I was getting the medicine, and they actually stopped the study in the middle of it because it was working. They said there's no sense in waiting to see if people die on placebos.
Right.
So here I am. I joined the Gay Veterans. I become an officer of the Gay Veterans. We're doing the Gay Pride Parade every year. We're going to the mayor's receptions at Gracie Mansion for Veterans Day and for Memorial Day and for Gay Pride Week. You know, we're always going to all these things and working with politicians and promoting legislation and all that kind of stuff. The main thing is that we're marching in the Veterans Day Parade and we're marching in the Gay Pride Parades every year. And we always march with the color guard, and I ran the color guard, and I made sure that everyone was in uniform who was in the color guard carrying the flag.
Okay.
So that continued until around 2002, after the collapse of the World Trade Center, where I also had offices. I lost my business at World Trade Center. But what happened was a lot of people started dying. We had a lot of World War II veterans, we had Korean War veterans, we had Vietnam veterans. A lot of Vietnam veterans are dying off in their 60s. A lot of them are dying off in their 50s. A lot of it because of Agent Orange or related diseases. Right. I think there's over 20 diseases that they can pinpoint as possibly or likely from exposure to Agent Orange. So I became very active with the Vietnam Veterans of America here, that chapter. I was the treasurer and worked on projects with them. We rebuilt the plaza at 55 Water Street, where the names are engraved in glass blocks. That it had gone into, the whole area had gone into disrepair, so we raised $6.5 million and redid that.
Wow.
I continued my HIV/AIDS for involvement. I'm still involved in it, but I gave up part of it. I went over to NYU. It was the VA Medical Center that sent me over to NYU for my medications to get into the study. Well, I was there. One of the study nurses asked me, what's your background? I said, in politics. She said, well, you'd be perfect for our community advisory board. So I joined their community advisory board, and within 6 months we did bylaws and elected officers for the first time. I was elected 5 times in a row as the vice chair, and then I was elected 12 times in a row as the chair of it.
Okay.
And then in 2010, I was elected the AIDS Clinical Trials Group under the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. They have annual meetings in Washington. And all the representatives from 4 continents would come. Because they have studies ongoing in Africa and Asia and South Asia and South America and North America. So I was elected the co-chair of the Global Community Advisory Board, and I served a 2-year term there. We had 72 reps from all over the world, and we worked on research. The agenda we recommended to the researchers and all that kind of stuff. So I did that for 2 years, and then they wanted me to run for another term. This is in the summer of 2012, and I said, you know, I've been doing this for 17 years straight, and I need to take a look at Don MacIver and take care of Don MacIver right now. So I retired from the AIDS Clinical Trials Group, but I still continue as a member of the National Community Advisory Board for the Department of Veterans Affairs. And not only did we started out with HIV and then added hepatitis C when that became a big problem, but the VA is the largest care provider in the world of HIV people, 22,000 on average. So
wow.
That's a lot. That's a lot of people.
And not all military, not.
No, these are people who are out of the military now.
Okay. But they were involved at one point in the Okay.
All veterans served at least, I think it's 120 days that you serve and you're considered a veteran.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So I'm still on that, and I was on several committees. I was on the executive board of different committees in the trial study team. We had one that was done with the VA and the Health Research Council of Canada and Medical Research Council of United Kingdom. So I made a couple of trips to London.
Nice.
You know, so I was very highly respected in the VA. And when one study would end, they'd ask me to come on to another study. So I played, you know, I did my politics, but I was also very keen on what was being done and provided input. So now, the most recent thing that I've done, and this is sort of the end of the interview because that's about it, unless you have questions.
You do.
But a couple of years ago, in 2012, I was asked to work with an organization here in New York called the Suicide Prevention Initiative. And there's an 85-year-old doctor. His name is Herbert Hendon. He lives over on Park Avenue at 86th Street. And during the Vietnam War, he started treating veterans from Vietnam for PTSD and suicide prevention.
Oh, okay.
Because there was a problem back then, too. They say that more Vietnam veterans have died of suicide than were killed in the war.
Wow.
And that's been years ago that they said that. So, and now we're dealing with the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. 22 veterans a day are killing themselves.
Right.
And I helped them do one of their annual fundraising dinners at an exclusive club in the city, and then also we did an annual walk, and we did a walk last year. One isn't planned for this year, but anyway, Herb Hendon, when he started treating veterans for these conditions in Vietnam, his friends said, "Well, why are you working with Vietnam veterans? You know, it's a horrible war, and no one likes these people.
Right.
They're not winning the war." And he said, "Well, that's not the veterans' fault." You know. I mean,
yeah.
And that's what happened with Vietnam. They blame us for losing that war.
Right.
I can tell you who to blame: Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon and the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretaries of Defense. That's who I blame.
McNamara, is that?
McNamara.
Yeah. Okay.
I read a book recently, and Lyndon Johnson never once sat down alone without McNamara there with his Joint Chiefs of Staff. Everything, it was like Rumsfeld with Iraq and Afghanistan. Everything was fed through Rumsfeld. Rumsfeld ran the war with Cheney, and McNamara ran that war. He apologized finally, but a little bit late. So anyway, that's the latest that I've been working on, and still stay involved in the veterans community. And when I'm called upon, I do well.
All right. So the one question I have two questions. The first is looking at the person you were before you enlisted in the military and the person that you become after. How much? What are the differences that you see in you as a person? Or I can also make that more specific if you'd like.
Well, you know, I've grown, I've matured. It's like when I came back from Vietnam after serving a year. I went in the Army at 20, I went to Vietnam at 22, I came home at 23. I look at kids today and who are 30, and their 20s are just awash. Nothing happened during their 20s. When I came home, I told my friends, I said, look, I've put my life on the line almost daily for a year. I've seen horrible things, but I've grown. And I said, I know that chronologically I'm going to age, and hopefully maturely I'll age. But I said, inside here, inside my heart, I'm always going to be 23. And that's how I feel today. Sometimes I still act like I'm 23, and those are good days. But, you know, it's you build a consciousness. And like going from being a Republican, trying to build a party that was dominated in a state by the Democrats, and it's now equally dominated by the Republicans. I was one of my friends told me, he said, well, Don, you were an activist when you were working in the Republican Party. He said, you've always been an activist. And then it wasn't until I was in my 40s for the March on Washington that I said, enough is enough. I'm going to go out and I'm going to protest. And when you look at my resume, if you look at my CV, my curriculum vitae, which is 7 pages long, and it was done in the format requested by the AIDS Clinical Trials Group and the Department of Veterans Affairs, because like with the Department of Veterans Affairs, when they did a study, and I was on the executive committee or the trials study team, my CV was right in there with all of the doctors and researchers. So I was included, you know, and they told me, they said, list everything you've done, and so pages of it is just my volunteer stuff. It's my military, it's my activism with the military, with the veterans, and then with the gay veterans, and then with HIV/AIDS. Okay. And you know something? I sent it to my mother. My mother's 90 years old. She lives in a suburb of Dallas, Marjorie Charlotte MacIver. And she sat and she read every word of it. She said, Don, I can't believe you've done so much with your life. And that's what it is. I feel that I'm 67, I've lived a full life. I lived a full life by the time I was 40. Right. You know something? I keep going. I wrote an article for, I think it was when I retired from the AIDS Clinical Trials Group. And the last thing I wrote in there is, how long will I keep doing this? Probably forever. Mm-hmm. I'll die an activist. I'll die an advocate. I'll keep going. And it's very heartening because, number one, you get recognized. I haven't been presented this yet, but you know, with this archiving, it was through Congressman Charlie Rangel, who's a congressman from Harlem and Bronx and Upper West Side. When he saw my CV, my curriculum vitae, one of the guys on a fellowship who helped set up this whole thing, Patrick Burns, they talked, and I'm being presented with a congressional proclamation, which is
amazing.
People don't get handed out like that. Mm-hmm. I've gotten recognition. I've gotten some certificates of appreciation and stuff like that. And I'm happy for that. It shows that people appreciate what you do. But you know something? The recognition that I get of having done a good job, and people say you know what you're doing, you understand the issues, you understand the policies, you understand. And so it's been a part of my growth, but it's also a culmination, I think, of my politics. The love of politics, the love of the campaign, it all flows very, very evenly and gently right into all the activism I've done. Okay. I feel very good inside.
Huh. And did you, when you were younger, did you envision yourself as an activist?
Oh, I envision myself as the President of the United States.
Okay. So politics was like an interest of yours, and yeah.
I started, my first political experience was in 1952. I was 5 years old, living in Dallas, and somehow I got a hold of a Young Bucks for Ike pin, and I put that on my T-shirt. And I'd walk around the neighborhood telling all of my neighbors I like Ike. Mm-hmm. That was the first year that they telecast national conventions. Of course, we only had black and white TV. I watched part of that. And then by 1956, I was saving the Life magazines and Look magazines on the conventions and watching the conventions on TV. My mother sat with me while I memorized the Gettysburg Address. We sat there while I memorized the presidents of the United States, when they were born, when they died, when they were in office. Another time I went to a Methodist church, and they were having contests on kids memorizing things, and I sat with my mother and I memorized the 60 books of the Bible. Wow. Including Habakkuk and all of these minor prophets and all of that kind of stuff. I was a real student of the Bible, but I stood up in front of the church and recited 60 books of the Bible, Old and New Testament.
That's great.
So yeah, I was very early on interested in politics and activism, and I was a Cub Scout and a Boy Scout and an officer, and I was president of the Future Medics Club in high school because I decided in 9th grade I was going to be a doctor.
Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't an athlete. I was a horrible athlete. I couldn't throw a baseball, and I still can't. But after doing my homework, I'd sit in the living room, and my folks had bought these Time Life albums, vinyl records of Beethoven's nine symphonies and the greatest classical works, and I'd listen to those, and I'd sit and read encyclopedias and the Book of Knowledge and the dictionary. Mm-hmm. I'd look up a word, then I'd read 2 or 3 pages of the dictionary. So I was I wasn't a nerd. I wasn't a real nerd, with the plastic.
Right, with the pocket protector. And
all the pins in my pocket and a slide rule and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But I love knowledge. And my mother recognized that in me as a really, really young kid, and she really promoted it. So I always said I want to die an educated man. I'm on my way to it.
Okay.
But anyway, that's a story of, we've gone from 1967 to 2014. So
yeah,
that's a long period of time.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you'd like to say, or that you?
No, I'd like to. One thing I've been meaning to say. During the Vietnam War, my mother's parents, my grandparents, maternal grandparents, had 17 grandkids. During the Vietnam War, only one of them was old enough for the draft, and he went in the Army. On my side of the family, the MacIvers, my grandparents had 10 grandkids, 2 of them girls and 8 boys. During the Vietnam War, 5 of us were eligible for the draft. We were draft age. My brother-in-law, my sister's husband, was also in the Army. So I had a cousin, my brother-in-law in the Army, a cousin in the Air Force in Iran, another cousin graduated from Annapolis and was in flight training, jet pilot flight training. Another cousin was on board the USS Enterprise, and then my brother was aboard the USS Truxtun, one of 4 nuclear-powered surface ships, along with the USS Enterprise, the Bainbridge, and the Long Beach. Okay. And he served off the coast of Vietnam, directing air traffic over North Vietnam. In other words, he would tell the American pilots when there was a MiG on their butt.
Oh, okay.
So and at one time, I think, all of my brothers, my brother-in-law, my cousins, we were all on active duty at the same time.
Wow.
Which is incredible. And if we weren't at the same time, we were probably missed it by 1 or 2 months. I'm trying to figure that out now. We come from a family tradition. I had 2 great uncles who were in World War I. My dad, his 2 brothers, and his brother-in-law were all my dad was in the Merchant Marine. He went to the Merchant Marine Academy and was a lieutenant. Mm-hmm. Sailed Liberty ships all the way from South America, Brazil, through the Caribbean, up through the Mediterranean, up through the North Sea. On D-Day, he was unloading a ship at a port in Wales. I had one uncle who served in the Pacific when they were island hopping all the way up to Japan. And then I had my aunt's husband was enlisted, but he was in Tokyo Harbor on board a ship and maybe on board the USS Missouri when they signed the surrender.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
So, and then my mother's brother served in the occupation forces in the Army in Japan. Okay. So everyone who could have served. And so there's quite a military history. And I think some of my dad's cousins also served in World War II.
Okay.
So it was
Wow.
quite a thing, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So, and when I got drafted, I thought, you know something, well, I'd just been hired to go to work for a U.S. Senator in Washington. I was 20 years old. I was on my way to Washington. The next week, my mother called me and said, Don, you have a letter here from Lyndon Johnson. It said, greetings from the President of the United States, inviting me into the armed forces. And they told me, he said, we'll go to the senator, Senator John Tower from Texas. One of the big architects, one of the big supporters of the Vietnam War. He said, go and try to get a deferment. I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go serve my country. Mm-hmm. So then I went down, enlisted for next year because I wanted to get my Green Berets, and that's where I started.
Okay.
So it was a trip.
That's cool.
But the military molded me to, I like to say, the man I became. Sometimes that's good, and sometimes it's not so good. But I'm here. I'm here, and this has been a real honor to be able to do this. I know that it's been long, and I probably gave more detail, but you know, it's like what I said earlier. A lot of these, when they look at the diaries from the Civil War and things like that, and the letters home, so much of the detail, the minutia, like what happens in surgery, or when someone's on an operating table, or what the wound looked like, or one thing or another. That's the only way that we know what happened in the Civil War, is because people wrote it down, and so I tried to do more detail.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
And now all these stories can go right into a book.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure.
I feel like I've just been interviewed
We'll let them hear.
I've been interviewed by one of the major people on network TV.
Thank you. Thank you.